That's the Spangler Woodline. Pickett's men will come out of that tree line and form a line of battle. The whole formation just starts coming towards us, and if we're Union riflemen here, we're going to stand here for 20 minutes and watch them come at us. We don't have anything to do until those columns get within rifle range, and we're ordered to fire, which is roughly the Emmitsburg Road. So we just stand here and talk about this magnificent sight of this 20-minute crossing of these 20,000 men as they come towards us. As the Confederate line gets closer, now the order to fire is given to the Union riflemen, and they talk about sheets of flames running down these stone walls as the order is heard by the soldiers. The lines of Confederates staggering under the volume of rifle fire and canister rounds that they're now taking. They hit the Emmitsburg Road, and a lot of these men don't want to advance any further. They're going to use the road as protection. This is where General Lewis Armistead puts his hat up on the top of his sword, pushes to the front, and leads Pickett's Virginians from that position up the sloping ground like these Boy Scouts are doing, slams headlong into the Union position along the stone wall, breaks open the Union line, and Armistead and a handful of Confederates will cross the line, advance as far as that small scrolled monument in front of the second cannon right there, at least tradition says. And at that point, as he places his hand on one of the wrecked Union cannons, Lewis Armistead will be felled by 2 rifle bullets, carried off the field, dying in a Union field hospital the next day. At that point, the entire Confederate crossing loses its momentum. The handful of men that have advanced this far will now be pushed back across the stone wall and ultimately end up retreating back across the fields in Pickett's retreat at this point. At the same time that fight is taking place, Pettigrew and Trimble's men have crossed the Emmitsburg Road out here, or at least some of them have, and they've started to work their way up across a series of fences, and they will literally advance almost into the muzzles of Union cannon that are along this fence. They will be driven back, some of them stepping over the wall and being taken prisoners, and some of them retreating back down across these fields back over to Seminary Ridge. If you're in the 26th North Carolina, the state of North Carolina puts their monument right there and says they advanced as far as that marker right there. Didn't break the wall, but came this far. After Pickett's charge is hurled back in retreat, the 13,000 men that participate, 7,000 will be left out here as killed, wounded, captured, or missing. That's 2/3 of the attacking force. Union troops will, on the ends of this line, actually start to swing out into the field, down where those fences are, and form a line of soldiers that pour an even more murderous fire into the flanks of these Confederate soldiers, literally putting them in a 3-sided box. After a 5 or 20-minute crossing, a 5 or 10-minute fight at this point, and then a 20 or 30-minute retreat across the field, Pickett's charge is over. Lee will ride out to the angle of trees, rallying these Confederate troops, expecting a Union counterattack that never materializes. The 2 armies will sit here, licking their wounds on July 4th when it begins to rain heavily. Lee will conclude by that evening that he cannot do anything more here in Pennsylvania and begin to pull the Confederate Army out of Gettysburg, going back across the South Mountains, turning towards the Potomac River, marching 2 days and 30 miles to get there, and then being stuck on the Maryland side of the river because the river is above flood stage for almost a week. Meade sets off in cautious pursuit, catches up with Lee's army on the 13th, plans to attack the next day, and by that point, the Confederates have gotten pontoon bridges up over the Potomac River and will fall back into Virginia. At that point, crossing back over Falling Waters, Johnston Pettigrew, the North Carolinian, who led Confederate troops right up to this point and fell back, will be mortally wounded in an engagement near Falling Waters and will die ultimately in what is West Virginia now, in a little town called Bunker Hill, as the Confederate Army falls back. Pickett will survive. So he becomes the guy whose name is always associated with this attack. Even though he didn't plan it, he was just trying to carry out orders, just like Trimble and Pettigrew were at this point. After this is over, the Richmond press has got to blame somebody for this debacle here in Pennsylvania. We're not going to blame Robert E. Lee. We don't want to blame Pickett. He was a Virginian. Let's pick on those North Carolinians. They were the guys. They obviously broke and ran over here. The guys on the end of Pickett's line, or Pettigrew's line, did not hold up their end of the bargain. Those flanking troops that got out to the edge of them on the Union side and were firing into them, those guys came halfway across and went back, and that did happen. So the Richmond press said, well, it was those North Carolinians that did it. Well, North Carolina said, hey, wait a minute. That unit on the far end was Brockenbrow's. They're Virginia troops. They're not North Carolina troops. So North Carolinians went further than Virginians did. So that's one of the reasons that monument's right there. Now, they didn't break the Union line right here like supposedly Virginia did, but if you look at the difference, that monument is further east than Armistead got.
Yeah.
So when they talk about North Carolina says we were farthest at Gettysburg, that's because of the 26th North Carolina right here, the North Carolina troops along this line. When this battle concludes, 51,000 total casualties will be listed. That's killed, wounded, or missing. That's almost 1 out of every 3 participants. 93,000 Union troops, 75,000 Confederates. 51,000 total casualties. 28,000 Confederate, 23,000 Union. Confederate Army leaves 5,000 Union soldiers behind because they think their trip across the mountains in unsprung wooden wagons will kill them outright. Field hospitals were here until almost November of 1863, the last of the wounded taken out. Confederates shifted to prisoner of war camps after this battle was over. After this fighting is over, the town still has to deal with all the dead that are buried out on these fields. We talked a little bit about how they were relocated. Imagine what you do with the horses and mules left over from fighting. Drug up into piles, set on fire, an estimated 5,000 animals had to be disposed of after this fighting was over. This was not a nice place to be. After all of this is over, we still have a one-legged general still running around claiming he was the hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. Sickles will survive until his 90s, outliving all of his other contemporaries in the Union Army as officers, insisting he was the hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. Dan Sickles, who will be responsible for shooting and killing the district attorney of Washington, D.C., a fellow by the name of Philip Key. Not a household word, but you know his father. He wrote the Star-Spangled Banner. Dan Sickles will survive this battle and insist until the day he dies he was the hero that won this battle for the North. He will go on to become the president of the New York State Monument Commission. Later in his life, when asked why he doesn't have a monument on this field, which he does not, his reply was, well, hell, the whole damn battlefield's my monument. In 1895, he will run for Congress, or in the 1880s, he'll run for Congress and get elected a second time. Second time he gets elected, the first bill he will introduce is a bill to have the federal government buy out that private corporation founded by David McConaughey in 1864. That corporation will be taken over on February 11th, 1895, and the Army will administer this battlefield to the 1930s. That's the reason Dwight Eisenhower came here in the 1920s, 1918 to conduct Camp Colt out here. So the guy who got the Union Army in the most trouble here at Gettysburg, Dan Sickles, is also the guy that got to preserve most of what we have here is Gettysburg National Military Park. This monument, which dominates this part of the field, is called the Eternal Peace Light with the flame up on the top of it. It was erected, well, let's say it was dedicated in 1938. In 1913, on the 50th anniversary of this battle, the federal government invited more than 50,000 Union and Confederate veterans back here to celebrate the anniversary. Those veterans were invited to a mass encampment on these fields, and those veterans wanted a monument to honor peace eternal and the nation united. They proposed the monument. Now, when you're trying to build a monument during the Depression in the 1920s and 30s, it's not a good time to get a big monument up, but that will be completed in 1938. So on the 75th anniversary of the battle, Franklin Roosevelt will come to Gettysburg. He'll address a crowd of an estimated 200,000 to 300,000 people standing and seated out in these fields where Iverson's North Carolinians moved in line of battle to try and drive out Doubleday's line to the south and mowed down. He will address a crowd of 1,800 Civil War veterans who range in ages from 88 to 112. Average age is considered to be 92 at that, and that event is considered to be the last mass reunion of Civil War veterans in our history. I think our fascination with Civil War battlefields are, we come to these places, we talk about them as hallowed ground because people put their life on the lines, they put their ideals higher than their own lives. You're 6 times more likely to die from a disease on a Civil War army than you were from a bullet. They were not good places to be in camps to train. Medicine was terrible at the time, and yet men routinely renewed their enlistments. They re-upped. They joined other volunteer units. They wanted to be part of this because they thought what they were fighting for was important. Whether you agree or disagree with whatever side you're on, they all showed up and made an effort. There were no volunteers here in 1863. That's coming with the draft, and those troops will appear in 1864 and 65 as the carnage that's going on for the first part of the war will be so great they need replacements. But here at Gettysburg, these are still 2 volunteer armies engaging each other. And I think our fascination is maybe we look at the conditions, we look at these fields, we wonder we do the same thing today that we did then, that they did then.